So tonight, our three speakers are going to give their three perspectives on empowerment. And there's also going to be an obvious thread that's woven through all three of the speakers and their talks. The first speaker that we have tonight, I've had the pleasure of introducing just this past year. Guy Felicella knows the disempowering effects of all of the drug crisis. And he knows the opioid crisis from multiple perspectives. He's desperately been working to try and find solutions to what seem to be absolutely intractable problems. He advises multiple government agencies. He speaks to experts across the country, and he's often interviewed on national radio and TV. And one personal thing to know about Guy is that he's actually moved by renovation television shows. What he sees is the fact that rebuilding lives is very much the same as rebuilding your homes. So we'll ask, what if we could prevent the damage of the drug crisis and avoid rebuilding lives? What would happen if we could focus more on harm reduction, recovery, and safe supply? And here to help us with that, with his talk, Rising from the Ashes, this is Guy Felicella.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to get right into it. There's different reasons why, people use drugs. Some use for enjoyment, some use to cope, some use to relax, some use because it's a social thing for them. And the reason why I say all these things is because I don't want to leave anybody out. And then for myself, I use to cope. And I grew up in a middle-class home just outside of Vancouver. And from the outside, everything looked perfect. We had a big house. My parents were hardworking people in the community. Big birthday parties, went to schools, had clothing, had food, but inside the household, there was some dysfunction. My dad was very verbally and physically abusive, mostly to me and my mother. And what that did to me at a very young age is the verbal abuse crippled me as a human being and left me with anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide. And so at a very young age, the foundation of my life, I looked for ways to cope. And as a young child, I excelled in sports. But unfortunately, what happens with sports is that they're only a practice here and a game here. And then for the rest of my life, I'm kind of trying to navigate around my household. I kind of describe my household as cloudy with a chance of thunder and lightning. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when it was going to go off. I navigated through my household like a soldier with a landmine field. I knew where the cracks in the floor were so that I couldn't startle anybody. And really what I was trying to do was just trying to alleviate the pressure that I felt to be perfect. And eventually when things started to go extremely downhill for me, where I had thoughts of ending my life, I found the most beautiful thing in the world. And to a lot of people, it's looked upon as a social evil.
Hello?
But when I found substances,
I'm listening to a TED Talk.
my whole life changed in the way that no matter what happened, I was coping with the pain that I was struggling with. I started running away from home. I started hanging around with a different crowd of people, which started getting involved in criminal activity. And before I knew it, was being brought back from getting arrested, going in through juvenile detention centers. And then eventually my parents went to court and made me a temporary ward of the court, which was basically them telling the court system that they could no longer handle me. And so the courts were going to decide where I was going to live. And sadly for me, jail, juvenile detention center was a safer place for me to live. And when I got out of jail, I was bounced around from group home to group home to group home. And finally, and eventually, I started running away and was homeless on the streets. In my juvenile years, I was probably homeless for about 4 years and started venturing into the downtown east side of Vancouver in around 1983 when I was about 13 years old. And I described it as when I first encountered the downtown east side, what I could see around me is brokenness. And the reason why I could see that is because I had those same feelings of brokenness inside, and I could relate to the people that were around me, and I could feel comfort and healing in that neighborhood. And so it was a place that I consistently moved and kept going back to. As a young teenager in the downtown east side, I wouldn't sleep on the street there. I would move into other areas and sleep there, but really the youth services that I was using in the downtown east side at that time kind of became my little bit of structure that I had in my life. Obviously, at the same time, my substance use started to increase. And before I knew it, I had a full-blown addiction. I never used drugs to be social. I used drugs for one thing, to cope with the unbearable void that was in my soul, that I was trying to constantly fill. And then I continued to try avenues of recovery at a young age and trying to go into treatment facilities. But the one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the pain becomes unbearable when you don't have your substances. And for me, it was really challenging to deal with the demons that I was dealing with. And so I continued to leave treatment to go back to what was familiar to me. And what was familiar in my life was for so long was pain. And I tried many attempts to change that. I tried to get a job, and I tried to, get a girlfriend and do things that other people were in society were doing, but it wouldn't last long because the voices that were in my head from the verbal abuse that I'd endured for so many years kept driving me back. And it's those voices that continued to haunt me throughout my life. And in about 1993, I never left a 2-block radius in the downtown east side for over 2 decades. I lived on 2 blocks for 20 years and became entrenched in a drug addiction, a heroin addiction. And when I was in the downtown east side at a very young age, I was down there before harm reduction even existed. And the challenges for a drug user is looked upon as a social scourge from the society that's surrounding us, is that I could see life happening around me, but there were so many barriers in place. I pictured it as like being on Alcatraz and seeing the San Francisco Bay, knowing that you'll never get there. And that's how I'd felt for such a long time. And every time that I consistently tried to change my life, the pain would come back, because what I had done is with those substances did that one thing that consistently made me feel like I belonged. It actually made me feel like I could make it through the day. And eventually what happens with these drugs that I was doing is the progression of it, they started to work against me. They started to take my life. They wanted to end my life, and that's what they were out for. And in around 1997, where I lived in the downtown east side, not only are we going through dual public health emergencies, I've survived now 2 public health emergencies colliding at the same time. The HIV crisis in 1997, where 1 in 4 were infected in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I somehow survived that. I'd also survived the overdose crisis in 1997, where people lost their lives to a contaminated drug supply. I've survived 5 osteomyelitis bone infections. These are life-threatening infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back where I had to relearn how to walk again. I've survived being brought back to life 6 times at the supervised consumption site. And what's really interesting is that on my last overdose, when I woke up and I leaned over and I pulled the tube out of my throat and I looked over to the left of me and the nurse was crying, and I looked at her and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Guy, because I care about you." And it was the first time that I'd actually broken down in my life and started crying with her. And so after that, she'd asked me, "Would you like to go to detox? We can get you in upstairs at the supervised consumption site." And I did. I took the opportunity to go up there, but the challenges of addiction and recovery and substance use is that it's the trauma that people endure for so long in their lives. It takes a lifetime to battle through. And so again, I left. And even with all those knocks against me, I continued to battle and battle and battle. And every day that I lived on this earth, I'd fought to live. And then in 2013, when I finally made the leap to leave, I went to a recovery society in Surrey, and then my life started to change. But before all this happened, the challenge for people is that it becomes so unbearable and so challenging to leave when you're struggling in addiction, that when you finally make the decision, the biggest thing that I've ever noticed in anyone's life that is support. And it's support of meeting people where they're at, no matter what their decision is in life, whether that they use drugs or don't use drugs. It's not about that. Recovery is about improving the quality of somebody's lives. Recovery is in the eye of the beholder. And for me, it was a journey that I'd had to discover on my own, because there was a lot of different versions of what people told me with recovery and how it would work. You really just have to find your own path. And when I walked away from the downtown east side, it was like a burning building. I looked at it like there was nothing to come back to. And I walked out of there with one set of clothes, a pair of sandals, because my feet were so swollen. I went to a recovery society and tried to rebuild my life. And in 2013, I met my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. My life's completely changed. Not only has it changed in many ways, but I tell you, the one biggest impact that you can have if anybody's struggling or have a family member that's struggling with addiction is this. And I'll tell you the story of the biggest impact in my life was my grandmother. And my grandmother witnessed the struggles in my life as a young child. But when I went into the downtown east side, it limited my opportunity to see her. She lived on the island. So twice a year, every year, for 20 years, she continued to come to the downtown east side to visit me, to take me out for lunch, usually around on my birthday and Christmas time. And she told me that one day that she'd always believed that something was going to happen and that I was going to change my life. And so years later, when I had gotten out of the downtown east side, my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she was given 2 weeks to live. And at the exact same time, my wife had become pregnant with our first son, Noah. And so we thought, what an amazing opportunity to go and let her know that she was going to have a great grandchild one day. And even though she only had 2 weeks to live, we thought it was fitting for us to let her know that what she did for me was I was repaying. And I'll get to that in a second. We went to go and give her the news at the hospice. And when we told her, I could see the spark of life hit her body. And she jumped up and she was grabbing my hand. She was so happy. And she said to me, she said, "Well, I can't wait to meet my great grandchild." And I actually said to her, "Well, that's not going to happen because you only have 2 weeks to live. The doctor's already told us." She grabbed my hand and said, "No, I will see my great grandchild." And so I said, okay, it's on. So every week, every day of the week, me and my wife went to see her at 7 o'clock for Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and Black Starbucks coffee, and battled it out. And then the doctors at the hospice were coming up to us because it was 2 months later, and they were saying, "Hey, what's going on?" Like, I was like, "Well, you guys are the doctors. Shouldn't you guys know?" And they were just, "Well, she's not taking all her medications." And I was like, "Well, just let her take it when she's taking it." My grandmother survived the full 9 months with pancreatic cancer, and I wheeled her out of palliative care into the Surrey Memorial Hospital. She held her great grandson Noah in her arms. And then about 2 days later, we went back to go and see her. And I could finally actually visualize and see the disease of cancer. It had riddled not only her body, but it had changed her face. And I could see that she was struggling. And she came and I sat down next to her and she held my hand and she says, "Guy, I'd always believed in you. And I'm so happy and I'm so proud of you. And I'm very tired and I'm going to let go. I'm in a lot of pain and I'm struggling." And I remember just saying to her that, "Grandma, you let go. It's okay." And she said, "I had to stick around, Guy, to make sure that you were going to be okay." And I said, "Grandma, I'm okay." And there's always a thing that we had, and she'd said, "Guy, now you go run that race." And so this is for my grandmother, as always. And Grandma, we're still running the race. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Great. Whew. Thank you so much, Guy. I've heard Guy speak innumerable times, and I think you can tell from what he says that no matter how many times you hear Guy speak, you still want to hear him speak again. Now, here's a chance to at least get one or two questions in. So if you want to ask Guy a question, you can type it in the chat box. And excuse me, you can make it to everyone, then we'll all see the question, and I'll make sure Guy answers it. What I'll do first is kick it off, and I want to ask you, Guy, for people who are feeling disempowered, the people are feeling completely helpless, how do they make a first step to be on that road to re-empowering themselves?
Obviously, the first step is the hardest. And sometimes we don't even know when we've made the first step. It's something that, we fall into. But when you make the first step is the constant, what I've always classified as the first step in my life and my journey was my willingness and ability to continue to pick myself up at no matter what was knocked against me, no matter how challenging it was, I continued to get up. Every overdose, I continued to get up. Every hospitalization, I continued to get up. And that's kind of the road when you're constantly searching and trying. You've made the first step. You just have to keep trying. And life is about those difficult challenges of I've learned so much from my mistakes. I didn't really learn much from my successes. I've learned a heck of a lot more from my mistakes in life. And so when you're making those mistakes, don't look at them as mistakes. Look at them as you're still continuing to make that first step to freedom. And eventually you're going to find it.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, Guy, I'm going to thank you again for contributing to our talk about empowerment. And we're going to move on to our next speaker. And that speaker is Janet Law. Janet is someone who feels a deep interconnection with the world. Her background is in healing and the creative arts. She has a lot of heart too. One of her highlights was being a producer and host of a weekly television show called Spotlight. And she'll prove that she is a public speaker. She's a wonderful facilitator and an advocate of 12-step and holistic education programs. She recently gave her TEDx talk entitled The Healing Power of Trees, where she demonstrated how we are all conduits in the global family forest. Tonight, She's going to share with us how every disappointment comes with its own divine appointment, and that we're all in perpetual recovery mode, powered by our own life experience. Here tonight with her message, Empowerment in the Storm, this is Janet Law.
Keep yourself alive, keep yourself alive. All you people, keep yourself alive. I was singing that song when I was blindsided by cancer diagnosis 20 years ago. I received life-saving treatment from trees. And 15 years before that, I faced my own addictions and a 28-day recovery center, where part of my treatment was walking with the trees. It helped bring me back. Us humans, we are always in recovery mode, much of the time anyways, powered by our own life experiences. And every day somebody will give you something to recover from. You know it's true. And when the storm of life arrives, you can be ready. Me and you together, empowerment in the storm. My father's family were farmers, tillers of the soil, whether it was planting potatoes or planting trees. They were always tilling the heart, and they were tillers of the soul. And so are we. Sometimes the harvest would be full of bounty and a bumper crop. And sometimes the harsh winter created less than an optimal planting in the spring. But life is like that. Your life is like that. But we are able to weather the storm. My dad moved to Vancouver in the late 1950s, and he arrived in the downtown East Side at the Harbor Light Shelter, where he discovered that it was not a handout, but rather a hand up, brought back into life with steps and a program of recovery. He had had many harsh winters as he struggled with alcoholism. But he came back. He came back from the bankruptcy that he felt in his own soul. And he got married, and he had a family, and he had 3 daughters. Because with every disappointment comes a divine appointment. He received what I call a holy shift. The word literally means to become whole. And so when we feel fractured and tired and scared and alone, we can remember to breathe in anything that life is giving us when everything seems to be falling apart. And I know there will be someone there to catch your fall, if you'll let it. We can learn a lot from trees and nature and how to keep ourselves alive, vibrant even in the depths of darkness. In my grandparents' front yard, there was a giant willow tree, and I called it my grandmother's willow tree, a reminder of always reaching up far to the sky and the groundwater below, rooted in nourishment. Because without me and without you, there is no family. So I want us to drink that in right now, to feel the power of what it feels like to have me and you together, to hold that now and breathe, breathe, breathe. Trees aren't codependent. They are interdependent. They understand the healthy relationship that they have with each other, so that when the storm comes, they stay strong in the wind together. Hurricane Frida came to town when I was 18 months old, on the eve of October 11th, 1962. And the wind howled and blew, and trees crashed against the front window of our house. And my dad held me in my arms. And I felt comforted and safe. And in the morning, the trees, they let the light in again. Those trees, they are always offering branches and leaves and fruit as an offering. Empowerment in the storm. Are you preparing yourself every day for a change of scenery? 'Cause it will arrive. With every disappointment comes a divine appointment. And that beauty that's in life, your life, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, it was made for you. Just last week, an ancient apple orchard was discovered in the Okanagan, buried for almost 200 years. And the arborists think that it will be regenerated, revitalized, rejuvenated. And the seeds of empathy that were planted all those years ago will bear new fruit. So allow yourself to become an advocate for yourself, so that you can allow yourself to be an advocate for others, to help one another, to nourish everybody back when there's a storm. Me and you and we can weather the storm, however much it is thrashing about us. And yes, my dad suffered from alcoholism, and he would proudly say, I am a grateful alcoholic, because it was that affliction that allowed him to come back with a sense of empowerment that he never knew possible. So instead of saying, holy shite, say, I'm ready for the holy shift. Just take a millisecond of time and do what you can do in this moment to bring harmony from chaos, interconnecting and intersecting with all of life. So that will allow you to stay on the growing edge, always. And remember, keep yourself alive, keep yourself alive. All you people, keep yourself alive. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Janet. Janet isn't someone who just talks about empowerment. She's someone who absolutely does her best to empower other people. And she was one of the first people to help me and my wife when we needed someone. And I'd like to ask Janet the first question, to give people to type in a question they have, if they have, for Janet, that I can read, and get it in quickly if you can, because Zoom sometimes has a little bit of a delay popping those up in the chat room. I want to ask you, Janet, for people that are going through challenging times with health issues, when they're feeling disempowered, how do you suggest that they work with health professionals for their own benefit?
Well, I kind of actually have to go back to what Guy was speaking about earlier. And although he didn't use the word, I think he was using this idea of the team, that we didn't get in it alone and we don't get out of it alone, but we need a team of people who can help us when we are most at risk, when we are most hurting, like that nurse that you spoke about, Guy, who actually reached out and touched you in a way that you hadn't been touched, your grandmother. I think that healthcare professionals are everybody that's in your circle of caring. Any person that is there to be a beacon of light when you may not feel like you can be a beacon of light. So that's what my first thought is when you ask me that question.
Right. I think I also remember that you talked about the fact that we're responsible also for ourselves. So if we're not getting along with our doctor, it's okay to fire them.
Yes.
So
yes, I fired a few doctors in my time, and
yeah,
got new ones too. So
yeah, I see two other questions have popped up, and the first one I see is, what other ways can one support themselves when going through a tough time? And that comes from Fern Logan.
what can others do? Well, I think having a time of reflection every day where you can go through in your own mind a way of silencing the thoughts that come in that sometimes prevent us from feeling that health because we're being inundated with, the monkey mind. I think that is one way. I think that being with our friends, even during this time of COVID, whatever you can do to have some kind of connection is just the most empowering thing that a person can do. So those are a couple of things I would say.
All right. Thank you, Janet. With that, I'd like to mention that for the speakers, the three speakers, although we've sent out much of your contact information in the promotions and letting people know how to get in touch with you, you also have the opportunity, as we've done in the past, if there's a way that you want people to get in touch with you, be it an email or a website, you can also put that in the chat to everyone now, in case there are people who had joined who haven't seen the other communications. Just another way just to reach out if someone wanted to be in touch with you, but felt that they wanted to do it more one-on-one later on. And now I'd like to introduce our final speaker, and that's Candace Platter. She's an addictions therapist in private practice, where she specializes in working with families of people who are struggling with addiction in her unique and signature family addiction therapy program. As a former addict with over 30 years clean and sober, Candace learned that overcoming addiction is a family condition. Everyone in the family is affected by addiction and everyone needs to heal. So for 3 decades, she's been helping both addicts and their loved ones understand their dysfunctional behaviors and to make healthier life choices. And the results that Candace achieves really are quite astounding. The addicts are able to stop using, family regain their lives, and they're able to free themselves from the ravages of addiction. Her successes mean that she's now a sought-after leader in the field of addictions, and she's developed the Platter method of family addiction therapy. She works with her own team of top associates, helping families and addicts break the cycle of addiction for good. And today, Candace is here with her talk, How to Love with Boundaries, the key that turns enabling into helping. This is Candace.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad that you're all here. I thought that I would start by telling you a little bit about my addiction and how that got started. Around when I was in my early 20s, which, as you can probably tell, was a long time ago, I was suddenly taken very ill and nobody knew quite why. And eventually I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is a very painful and debilitating inflammatory bowel disease. It was a new disease at that point. The doctors really didn't know what to do for me. They had never even really heard of Crohn's before. So an addiction also was not on the radar the way it is today. So what they did for me was they gave me a lot of medication. And I later found out that the medication they gave me was very addictive. So they were giving me codeine and oxys and Demerol and Valium. And it's really kind of amazing that I'm still here, because that is a killer combination of prescription medication. It takes a lot of people out. And what it did to me is I became really depressed and eventually became suicidal. I was quite convinced I was going to take my own life. And at that point, I knew I didn't really want to die. So I reached out for help, and I started going to 12-step programs. Back then, there weren't nearly as many 12-step programs as there are today, but I was going to NA and AA and ACOA and CODA and Al-Anon, and basically anything that would help me feel better. And that was the end of my 15 years of being an opioid addict. I made the choice to stop using. And next month, on July 18th, I will be celebrating 33 years clean and sober, one day at a time, which is the way all of us do it. About 3 years into my recovery, I decided that I was going to make a career change, and I wanted to work in the addiction field. I wanted to give back some of the help that had been given to me. So Guy was talking about the downtown East Side. I got a job in the downtown East Side as an addictions counselor. And as I was working there with the addicts and the alcoholics, and I just want to say that when I talk about addicts, I'm talking about people who are still choosing to stay in active addiction, instead of making the choice to be in recovery. And they can be using anything, drugs, alcohol, gaming, porn, gambling, anything. And so I was working with the addicts and the alcoholics there, and something unexpected happened. I started to get phone calls from the families of the clients that I was working with. And they were telling me that they were just at the end of their rope. They were trying everything they could think of to help their loved one, and nothing was working. So as I was there doing this work for 16 years, I saw a pattern emerging. I was working on the one hand with the addicts. I was working on the other hand with the families who were basically giving in to their addicts' every demand because they thought that that was the loving thing to do. Nobody was telling them anything different. But what I was witnessing was how a person can love someone to death by doing things that they thought were loving. They were really helping the addict stay an addict. I mean, wouldn't it be great if all of us were raised in families where healthy boundaries were talked about and set and maintained? But really, I mean, most of us were not in those families. I know I wasn't. So a lot of us avoid setting boundaries in the first place because it's scary. We don't know how to do it. We don't know what our needs are, how we're feeling, how to language it. A boundary, how do you do that? And let's face it, the addict you love is not going to come to you and say, please set some healthy boundaries for me. I mean, that's not going to happen. So here's the deal. If you want your addict to change, and I know that you do, you're going to have to change what you're doing first. Watching somebody you love struggle with addiction, it can rip your heart out. It's horrible. But the truth is that when you find someone living in active addiction, the chances are really good that you're going to find somebody who's enabling them, who's unaware of how they're contributing to the problem. So what's the difference between enabling and helping? How do these two concepts get so mixed up? Well, when you do something for a person who can and should be doing that for themselves, you basically rob them of the opportunity to develop their own resilience. And what happens from there is kind of a learned helplessness and a toxic feeling of entitlement. Like, you should be doing everything for me. Why aren't you doing everything for me? When you pay an addict's rent, or when you have an addict who's still in active addiction living in your family home, who's, sleeping all day because they're up all night doing their addiction, and you're lying for them, you're making excuses for them, you're setting the bar really low for them. Sometimes you allow them to get away with pretty obnoxious behaviors like punching holes through the wall, or telling you to F off, or, shoving people out of their way. If there are no consequences for those behaviors, why should they change? This is what we know for sure. An enabled addict does not recover, because why should they? And as a society, we're still not talking about the deadly dangers of enabling, not nearly enough, or about how enabling is helping to fuel this addiction crisis that we're in. So why do people enable addicts? I mean, if it's such a bad thing to do, then why does it happen? Well, let's try this. If you consider yourself to be a codependent person or a people pleaser, I like the term people pleaser because I feel like I'm a recovering people pleaser. If you think you might be that, raise your hand. Or at the very least, admit it to yourself tonight. And for the people pleasers out there, I want you to think about something. How much do you just really love conflict? No, right? You don't love conflict. So the reason we people please, the reason we enable, is because we don't want to have to deal with somebody else's disappointment or frustration or anger toward us, because we believe that that's going to lead to the very conflict that we're trying to avoid. But when we deal with life that way, we ultimately end up saying yes when we mean no. We start feeling really resentful to the people that we're saying yes to. We're angry at ourselves for not saying no. This is a really tough place to be. And we get caught up in the deadly dangers of enabling, which can actually hurt your addict more than you can even imagine. So it becomes a choice point for the loved one. Are they going to dig in and stop their enabling behaviors, or are they going to give in and keep fueling the addiction? And hey, I get it. I mean, loved ones, they are exhausted. They're brokenhearted. Their lives are shattering all around them. But when we love our children, our parents, our siblings, our friends in that enabling way, this is how we can love someone to death. And for every one overdose death or one intentional suicide, there are usually at least 10 or 20 people left behind, family members, friends who are second guessing them, everything they said or did, and they're wondering whether what they did was hurting instead of helping, wondering if they might have been part of the problem. But like I said, when you find an addict living in active addiction, chances are you're going to find somebody who's enabling them. Millions of families are burning through their life savings. They're amassing huge debt, just trying to pay for everything from the addict's rent to their rehab program. The financial, mental, and emotional chokehold this has on all of those families has itself become a monumental crisis. And in this time of COVID-19, when so many families don't have any income, they don't have any money, and they're still trying to pay for everything for the addict, well, that just makes everything worse. So it's really important that we start talking now about how enabling is feeding this crisis. Learning how to set and maintain healthy, self-respecting boundaries is imperative for everyone, and especially for the addict that you love so dearly. We need to know what our boundaries are. We need to know how to language them, how to maintain them when the going gets rough, because if you set a boundary and then you cave, you don't follow through, the addict is just going to be waiting for you to cave again, and they'll keep poking at you until you do. You'll just kind of have to start all over again. You don't want to set boundaries when you're angry or triggered by something that the addict has done or said. You want to have a more loving approach, because that's what's really helpful. So you want to make sure you're in a calm state of mind, that you're consistent, you're prepared to follow through, setting your boundaries in a non-charged moment as much as possible. That's really the way this can work. And please remember, setting healthy boundaries with the addict you love, it's not a punishment. You're doing it to actually help the person you love. Because this is what love with boundaries looks like. This is what real help looks like. And this is what can make recovery possible for addicts and for their families. So instead of loving our addicts to death, let's learn how to love our addicts to life. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Candace. It's great that we can all connect with Zoom, but I think one of the things I miss the most is the ability for us to somehow show our appreciation with applause and other things for our speakers. So as a lot of people have been doing, anything you want to pass along in chat, even if it's just a thank you, go ahead and do it. It's your opportunity, especially probably over the next 6 or 7 minutes, to just get that in. And also time for your questions to send it over to Candace, because we do have a couple minutes here. I want to ask Candace about stop. Did you mention stop?
I didn't mention stop. I wonder if that person could maybe say some more. I'm wondering if that person might be thinking of nope.
Sorry.
Is it nope?
Nope,
Okay.
I meant nope, sorry, yes.
Okay,
Nope.
Okay. So nope is a program that I've come up with, and it means no option program for enabling. And I like to say N-O-P-E, nope. So we learn how to stop enabling. It's a program that puts, it puts information into your home that you can use with your addict if you have that happening in your family, or as a prevention tool so that it doesn't have to tear your family apart. If you'd like some more information about that, you can get in touch with me, and I've put my contact information in the chat already.